My name is Maggie, and 3 weeks ago I passed out at work. 1 minute, I was typing up an expense report. The next, I was staring at the buzzing lights on the ceiling of an ambulance. The doctor said it was stress, heart palpitations from burnout and exhaustion, which sounded like a fancy way of saying, your body just gave up pretending everything was fine. They wheeled me into the ER, hooked up monitors, stuck an IV in my arm, and left me to rest while they ran tests. The nurse was kind, but I could tell she thought I should have someone there. She asked if my son was coming, and I nodded, even though I knew he wasn't. Lying on that gurney, I did what most people do when they're alone and scared. I checked my phone. Maybe Brian had called. Maybe Heather had left a message. But what I saw was worse than silence. It was a photo. Heather had posted a picture of them all at my old dining table, smiling over a fancy dinner. Brian is at the head of the table. Heather is in my old seat, and Sophie, my granddaughter, was laughing like nothing was wrong. The caption punched harder than any chest pain. Finally, a peaceful night without the drama queen. I stared at the screen, thinking it had to be a joke. A bad one. But the comments were real. Laughing emojis, heart reactions. People praised the happy family moment. So that was it. While I was lying in a hospital bed with wires stuck to my chest, they were celebrating my absence, not worried, not checking in, just relieved that I was gone. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I clicked open my contacts and called my lawyer. Because if I were the drama queen, it was time I got my crown back. It started after Tom died. 38 years together. And then suddenly, I was a widow, with a big house, and too much silence. The days were long, but the nights were worse. I'd walk past his recliner and catch myself starting a sentence, forgetting he wasn't there to finish it. Brian stepped up in those first weeks. He brought groceries, helped with paperwork, and took me out for lunch on Sundays like clockwork. Heather was always there too, smiling gently, squeezing my hand, telling me I didn't have to go through this alone. They said all the right things, and I believed them. I remember the night they first brought it up. We were on the porch, drinking lemonade like we used to when Brian was a teenager. He looked around the yard, then turned to me, and said I shouldn't be rattling around that big place by myself. Heather chimed in, nodding like it had been on her mind too. They said they could move in for a while, just until they found a place of their own. Sophie could stay in her school district. I'd have company. It sounded like a win for everyone. I told myself it was temporary. I even liked the idea of hearing a child's laughter echo through the halls again. I agreed to rent a small apartment nearby. 1 bedroom, quiet street, close enough to visit whenever I wanted. They offered to handle the mail, the housework, and the bills, said it would be easier if they took care of things until I was ready to fully let go. Looking back, I don't know when temporary turned into permanent. Maybe it was when they repainted the kitchen without asking, or when Tom's recliner disappeared from the living room. One day, my house stopped looking like mine. I started to feel like a guest when I visited. My things were boxed up. Some never made it to storage. They said Sophie needed more space, that they had to declutter. They started referring to the house as their home. Heather told friends we'd gifted them the place after Tom passed. I let it slide, thinking it didn't matter what words they used. The mail never made it to my new apartment. They said it was easier to keep it all in one place. I stopped seeing my own bank statements, stopped noticing what was missing. They said it was just part of helping me adjust. I thought they were being helpful. Every time I asked when they'd start looking for their own place, something came up. Brian's job was unstable. Sophie was adjusting to middle school. Heather had a health scare. Then, a family emergency. Then, a promotion made moving inconvenient. The goalposts kept shifting, and I kept making excuses for them. It's strange how quickly you can go from the head of the family to the background noise. I was still mom, still grandma, still the woman who kept everything running for decades. But suddenly, I had to text before visiting. They'd sigh when I called. And holidays became awkward scheduling negotiations instead of something we looked forward to. At the time, I didn't call it manipulation. I called it a sacrifice. I told myself it was what Tom would have wanted. But now, sitting here with hospital bands still on my wrist, and that awful caption burned into my memory, I realize what it really was. A setup. A perfect plan to make me step aside while they moved in, took over, and eventually erased me altogether. At first, I thought I was just being sensitive. They were busy. That's what I told myself every time a call went unanswered or a weekend plan got postponed. Life gets hectic with a child and 2 full-time jobs, right? But the pattern started to show itself in small, sharp ways. I'd drop by the house to bring cookies, and no one would be home. Later, I'd see photos online of a dinner party I wasn't invited to. Smiles in every frame except the space where I should have been. Once or twice, I let it go. But once or twice turned into every time. On my birthday last year, I waited for a phone call that never came. Around 10 p.m., I got a text that said, "Sorry, long day. Happy birthday," with no punctuation. At Christmas, they handed me a gift bag with a candle from the clearance bin. The price sticker still half torn off. I had spent days shopping for everyone else. Thoughtfully, carefully. I knew their favorite colors and scents. They didn't even know mine. Mother's Day became a group brunch, where I was treated like an afterthought. Heather's mom always got the seat at the center of the table, the flowers and the toast. I got polite nods, as if I'd wandered into someone else's celebration. And when Sophie started having recitals, I had to ask for the dates. Sometimes I was late at the last minute, sometimes not at all. There was one school play where I showed up early and still ended up standing in the back. They had forgotten to save me a seat. Later, Heather said she thought I wasn't coming. I didn't argue. What was the point? They started using phrases like, "She prefers to stay home," or "She's not really social these days." I heard that one more than once. At first, I believed it. Maybe I had pulled away. Maybe grief had changed me more than I realized. But when I looked at old photos and scrolled through family posts, I saw what was missing. Me. It wasn't that I had withdrawn. I had been excluded. I had become the shadow, the person who dropped off casseroles but never stayed for dinner, the one who got tagged in group photos she wasn't part of. I watched them build a version of family life where I didn't exist. A cleaner narrative. Easier to manage. No wrinkles. No reminders of the past. And what hurt most wasn't being forgotten. They realized they had worked to forget me, that my absence made things easier for them, that peace, in their eyes, meant silence from me. I was no longer Maggie, the mother who held everything together. I was just the drama queen, the old voice they'd muted. It's one thing to lose your place in someone's life. It's another to be erased from it on purpose. Bit by bit, moment by moment, I went from being their home to being their inconvenience. And I let it happen because I didn't want to rock the boat. Because I thought love meant patience. Because I hoped they would remember who I was to them. But love that only works when you're quiet isn't love at all. It's control, dressed up as kindness. And it took me almost losing everything to see it clearly. The moment I got home from the hospital, I didn't sit down. I didn't make tea. I didn't cry. I went straight to the drawer where I kept my old address book and found Paula's number. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she retired from her firm, but I knew she'd pick up. She always had. When I told her I needed legal advice about a property matter, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come over." Her kitchen table looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. She made coffee, pulled out a notepad, and told me to start from the beginning. I laid it all out. The move, the house, the caption, and somewhere between the 5th and 6th sentence, I saw it click in her eyes. She asked who the deed was under. I assumed it had been transferred at some point. Surely Brian had taken care of it, when they started managing everything. She shook her head and pulled up the property records online. The house was still in my name. Not jointly, not in trust, just mine. That realization hit me like cold air. I had stepped aside, moved out, paid rent, and let them live there for 3 years, all while I remained the legal owner. But Paula wasn't finished. She asked about any mail forwarding, any financial access I'd granted them. I told her how the bills were handled, how the mail kept going to the house. She asked when I'd last seen a credit card statement. I couldn't remember. That's when she got serious. She called in a friend who worked in forensic accounting. By the time he pulled up my credit report, my stomach was already turning. There were 3 credit cards I didn't recognize, 2 personal loans I'd never signed for, and a home equity line of credit for over $60,000. I stared at the screen like it might change. It didn't. The lender's name was real. The address tied to the account was my house. The signature on the documents? Sloppy, but close enough to pass. Paula didn't mince words. It was fraud. Identity theft. And it wasn't random. Someone who knew my habits, my paperwork, my passwords, had done this. She asked if Brian had access to any of it. I hesitated. Then I said what I already knew. No, but Heather did. That was the moment everything shifted. The grief got quieter. The confusion stopped spinning. And in its place came something sharp and still. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. I had been lied to, used, and stolen from. But the house was mine. My name was on the deed. And I wasn't going to let them take one more thing from me. The next morning, Paula showed up with her laptop, a folder full of printouts, and a quiet look that told me I wasn't going to like what she'd found. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one I had eaten dinners on for years, now covered in paperwork that didn't belong to me. She pulled up the credit report first, her eyes scanning the page as she walked me through it. 3 credit cards, all with balances close to their limits. One had over $12,000 in charges, mostly for restaurants and clothing stores. The billing address was still listed as my old house, and the contact phone number matched Brian's. There was also a personal loan for $25,000. And then another one. This time, for 10. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. My signature was on the loan documents, but I had never signed anything. It looked close, just not quite right. My stomach dropped. And then she showed me the home equity line of credit. $65,000, taken out a year ago. The money had been deposited into an account I didn't recognize. I felt like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But this was mine. I had let them handle the mail. I had trusted them to be decent, to be family. Paula looked up from the screen and said something, but I didn't hear it. My ears were ringing. My heart was pounding again. But not from fear, from rage. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. They hadn't just taken my house. They had taken my name, my credit, my identity. And they'd done it quietly, behind a mask of helpfulness. The betrayal wasn't accidental. It was strategic, calculated, cold. Paula reached into her folder and pulled out a second stack of papers. She slid one toward me, her face unreadable. It was a draft petition. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Guardianship Inquiry." The name listed was mine. I stared at it like it might vanish. But there it was, filed electronically from an IP address linked to my old house. Paula explained that Heather had been in paralegal work for years, mostly handling elder law cases. She knew the system, she knew the language, and apparently, she'd been building a case to have me declared legally incompetent. I felt my hands start to shake. Not just from the violation, but from the intention behind it. They weren't just stealing from me. They were trying to make sure I couldn't fight back. By the time they filed the guardianship papers, they would have painted me as forgetful, unstable, unfit to manage my own affairs. And once that label stuck, I'd lose everything. Paula pointed to a section with notes about supporting evidence. Missed appointments. Signs of confusion. Emotional outbursts. None of it was real. But they were keeping track of things that could be twisted, taking photos when I looked tired, recording phone calls without telling me, all to build a narrative that I was slipping. The betrayal deepened in that moment. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about power, control, and the terrifying thought that if I had waited just a few more months, I might have been locked into a system I couldn't escape. I looked at Paula and asked her what we had to do next. She didn't hesitate. First, we file fraud charges. Then, we prepare for war. Because this wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it was a takedown. And I wasn't going to go quietly. The next few days moved like a strategy session. Paula brought in a real estate agent she trusted. A woman named Sharon, with silver hair and sharp eyes, who didn't ask unnecessary questions. We met in my apartment instead of the house. Quiet, quick. No paper trail that would tip them off. The listing documents were signed, and the process began with discretion. I made sure of that. At the same time, Paula began compiling everything we'd need to press criminal charges. She warned me it wouldn't be fast, but it would be thorough. Identity theft, financial fraud, attempted guardianship under false pretenses. The more we uncovered, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just opportunistic. It was a long game, one they'd played before. That confirmation came from a quiet call Paula made to a probate attorney she knew, just to check. A few days later, we got the answer. Brian and Heather had once lived with his great-aunt Lillian for 2 years before she passed. Lillian's estate had been left almost entirely to a charity. But during the probate process, discrepancies were found in her financials. Multiple credit lines had been opened in her name. Large cash withdrawals. Unexplained expenses. There had been whispers in the family, but nothing stuck. Lillian had been declining mentally. No one pushed. No one wanted to believe Brian would do something like that. Now I saw it clearly. They hadn't just stumbled into this with me. I was part of a pattern, a plan, and that's when I stopped feeling ashamed. I stopped questioning if I was overreacting. They had made me feel dramatic for years. Too emotional. Too involved. But now I understand. That was the design. Keep me quiet. Keep me small. Keep me out of the way long enough to strip everything down to nothing. So I stood up. I bought a notebook. Started documenting everything. Dates. Comments. Things I remembered now with new clarity. I met with Sharon twice more. We photographed the property. Got inspections done. And Paula reached out to the district attorney's office with a preliminary statement. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was true. It was the chance to stop pretending things were fine while being slowly erased. And maybe, just maybe, to stop them before they did it again. Because if there was one thing worse than being betrayed by your own family, it was knowing they'd done it before and would likely do it again. This wasn't about saving my house anymore. It was about saving myself. And I was done being quiet. She showed up just after 7 in the evening, small and shivering on my doorstep with a suitcase too big for her hands. Sophie, my granddaughter. Her eyes were red, and her voice cracked when she asked if she could come in. Behind her, down the block, I saw Brian's car idling at the curb. They didn't even walk her to the door, just sent her up alone, like a message in a bottle. She said her mom told her to talk to me, that maybe if I remembered we were family, I'd stop trying to make them homeless. I made her tea and sat her on the couch. Her little fingers curled around the mug like it was the only warmth she had left. I asked her if her parents had explained why I was selling the house. She shook her head. They just said I didn't want them to be happy anymore. The manipulation was so thick I could barely breathe. But then she said something that stopped everything. I asked her what they did for Christmas. She blinked, like I'd asked a strange question. Said she stayed with her friend Caitlin for a week because her parents had to visit sick relatives and didn't want her to catch anything. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I had seen the receipts, the resort, the airfare, the spa packages, and now I knew. They had gone to Mexico without her. Left their child behind to live out their fantasy vacation on stolen money. I pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, and promised her she would never be used like that again. Whatever happened next, it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protection. They had crossed a line they couldn't walk back from. I walked Sophie down to the sidewalk with her suitcase in one hand and my keys in the other. Brian rolled down the driver's side window the second he saw us. His expression flickered between smug and nervous, like he couldn't decide whether to scold or negotiate. Before he could speak, I raised my voice just enough to cut through the car's hum. If either of you ever uses this child to manipulate me again, I will add child endangerment to the list of criminal charges I've already filed. Brian's mouth opened, then closed. Heather leaned across the passenger seat, her face pale under the glow of the dashboard. She tried to say it was a misunderstanding, that things had gotten out of hand. I didn't let her finish. Identity theft, credit fraud, forged signatures, a guardianship petition. You never thought I'd see. I laid it all out in front of them. Every detail, every dollar. Sophie stood beside me, staring at her parents with wide, searching eyes. When I mentioned Christmas in Mexico, she didn't flinch. Brian's voice cracked as he told me I couldn't just take their daughter. I told him I wasn't taking her. She was choosing to stay with someone who wouldn't lie to her. Someone who saw her as a person, not a bargaining chip. I turned and opened my front door. Sophie followed me without looking back. Her parents sat in the car, stunned, as if the script they'd written had suddenly been taken from them. Inside, I set her suitcase by the couch and told her she could have the guest room. She asked if we could make pancakes for dinner. I said yes. And just like that, the power shifted. Not with shouting, not with revenge, but with truth, spoken clearly and out loud. The case took nearly a year to move through the courts. Brian was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and identity theft. Heather took a plea deal and received probation, along with mandatory financial restitution and therapy. I didn't attend every hearing, but I was there for the sentencing, not out of anger, just to witness the end of what they started. I looked at them both one last time and felt no hate, just distance and peace. Sophie came to live with me officially 3 months later. The custody judge didn't even hesitate. Her testimony was clear, and so was her choice. She wanted to stay in a home where she felt safe, where her voice was heard. We painted her room lavender and added glow in the dark stars to the ceiling. She smiled more, laughed more, slept through the night without waking up in tears. As for the house, it sold quickly. The proceeds paid off the debt they had piled under my name. What was left went into a savings account for Sophie's future. She doesn't know all the details yet, and she doesn't need to. What matters is that we're okay now. Safe. Together. Every now and then, I catch myself standing at the kitchen sink, watching her do homework at the table, and I feel the quiet settle in around us. Not the kind that follows loss, the kind that follows healing. They called me the drama queen. They said I was the problem. But in the end, I was the one who stood up, who fought back, who protected what mattered. And that's a title I'll carry with pride. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that dignity is something you have to defend. Not with fists or anger, but with truth and the courage to speak it, even when your voice shakes. Trust is precious, and once broken, it teaches you who really stands with you. I spent years thinking I was the problem. Too emotional. Too much. But sometimes, the people calling you dramatic are the ones writing the script. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by someone you love? Tell me your story. You're not alone. And your voice matters here.